Oh no, oh no, not another long video. Yes, unfortunately, this is probably going to be another long video. I do apologize. I do apologize. Because I know it can be difficult sometimes, because I know people like when I do the shorter stuff. I know people like when I do the longer stuff. But oh boy. Like we cannot ignore the fact when John Redwood, arch Brexiteer himself, decides to write fan fiction and then right at the end is going to tease us. Yes, John Redwood is going to tease us with a potential future article about all these Brexit possibilities that the government could be doing. Which, of course, as I've said before, whenever we come up with one of these Brexiteers and they talk about, oh, there's all these Brexit benefits that we could be doing, you will not be too surprised that this article is once again void of any Brexit benefits. But of course, this is John Redwood, and John Redwood is writing pure political fiction. In fact, just to spoil some of this for you, here's some of the stuff that the first three comments that the people have written about this. So he says, well, our leading technological company, Arm, obviously didn't agree with John Redwood, since they have just rejected the Brexited UK for the US market. So definitely disagree with him. The next comment is a standard piece from Sir John, which, as usual, fails to actually provide even a smidgen of detail as to which, quote, failed EU laws and policies he regards bad for the UK. And then part of why I'm calling this this video John Redwood's fantasy fiction is because of this comment, which is, yes, fantasy fiction can be fun, and Redwood is just a past master of the arts. And then here's an interesting one, which we're getting into as well. Set the water companies free. Perhaps that is what Redwood has in mind, a 40% rise in water charges, and apparently the government is drawing up plans in case Thames Water collapses under the £14 billion of debt, which will enable transferring this debt to the taxpayer by any chance. But perhaps this nightmare is all the fault of the EU. Everything else is. No one likes Redwood. On here, on all these articles we've been seeing recently on all this stuff, none of these articles have been positive. All the comments have been very, very negative. And you cannot say that this is not a captive market. I've said this multiple times before. Conservative Home is very influential in the non-conservative party. It is massive. It does regular reach outs to the non-conservative party, which does all those polling, who's popular, all the time. So it is very influential. So when you've got very, very likely conservatives, those aren't trolls. Those are people who are conservatives who are not happy with John Redwood writing this stuff for Conservative Home. And I think it just goes to show you, as we said before, after the next general election, which ultimately I think the Conservatives will lose, like their party is in for a very, very difficult couple of years, and long may it continue. Because, like I say, the longer it goes on, the better it is good for us progressives. So let's go diving into this, because oh boy, like I say, prepare for some serious fantasy fiction from John Redwood. But before we dive into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, there's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. And yesterday, we did, obviously, the Pony Club video for all the Pony Clubbers and, of course, the Patreon members. So do remember, go check that out if you are subscribed to that. And of course, if you do subscribe, you get all the rest of the videos that we've made for those as well. So let us dive now into Conservative Home and John Redwood's piece of fantasy fiction titled, "The Government Has Been Too Cautious in Making the Most of the Freedoms of Brexit." So, as a young man, Guys, is this going to be this is the John Redwood life story? As a young man, I voted in the 1975 referendum on staying in the European community. I read the Treaty of Rome, which bound us, and realized it set out a long journey to the European Union. The main political parties told me to vote to stay in something they called the common market. This lovely myth was a free market with no damage to our ability to make our own laws and spend our own money. Um, that was not true at all. The common market always had its own rules and regulations. Everyone agreed, look, if we're going to create a common market, then we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. That was very, very explicit from day one. You can go back and you can check the literature. You can see the old speeches from Margaret Thatcher when she was campaigning in that bizarre woolly jumper that she wore from that time. But yeah, no one was saying that we weren't going to be able to make our own laws. We can do, but there was going to be, this is the level that we all agree that if you want to improve your laws, that's fine. But we're all agreeing that this is the standard. And that is what has been the common market. That's why it's been so successful, because everyone follows the same rules and regulations. And if you do that, that means you don't have to fill out any cross-paper trade work, because both countries know that in the single market, they know full well we're both following the rules, we're both following the same regulations, so it's fine for goods to flow freely between the two. Of course, again, we always had the ability to make our own laws, so again, that's false. And of course, spend our own money. Again, we're spending our own money all the time. What does John Redwood think we were spending our money on? I did not believe them, and of course, voted to leave. I found it difficult to grasp how they could so misinterpret the treaty we had signed. It wasn't the fact that they misinterpreted the treaty, it was the fact that Brexiteers started drinking the random Brexiteer Kool-Aid around Euroscepticism and started to say things that just weren't blatantly not true, and they started to believe their own hype about it. And here we are. So it was a blow when I heard the result. As a good Democrat, I congratulated the winners, and I did my best to get behind their winning vision. I had no wish to undermine their actions, which I had opposed. I resolved to help the winners implement their vision of keeping the European community to just a common market, or more likely, helping opt out us of all the obvious other integration measures, which was the inevitable ECC/EU, which would wish to advance. The Yes campaign had simultaneously denied suggestions of European Union foreign policies, military task force, migrations, crime policies, taxation, and much else that it was to evolve. Well, again, the European Union does not have a foreign policy. It does not have a military task force. It has nothing of that. The EU is still very, very much all about trade and regulation and making those laws in and about trade and regulation. Doesn't really have too much anything else. It does not have crime policies. It does not have taxation policies. It has a budget which all members pay into to keep, the various functioning bodies that it has running, mainly, of course, looking at standards and policing bodies to check that, companies are following those standards. But that is it. Once again, this is what we said about the Brexiteers. I've just said they would misinterpret everything what was said. So for 20 years, I kept this spirit, never challenging the decision to stay in. I was appointed the single market minister. That was the worst job I had to do in government. It showed me from the inside just how far the EC and its single market had deviated from the common market vision of 1975. Well, yes, of course it changed from 1975. Institutions change all the time. Our own government is not the same. It does not function the same as it did in 1975. So is John Redwood going to say that we should rewind the clock on policies, on things that we have done and passed in Parliament since 1975? As after all, it's not the same. We've deviated from the original pristine version of Parliament. Well, maybe we need to rewind all the way back to the Parliament of Saints, that was going to usher in the apocalypse after the English Civil War. Do we have to go that far back? So, using the market as cover, the EC bombarded us with laws on matters ranging from environmental to taxation. Yes, because you need environmental policy. That's a given. Taxation, again, what taxation policies in particular are you talking about? Because as far as I'm aware, the EU does not set out taxation policy. From health and safety to employment, again, if you've got free movement of goods and people, then you need to obviously make sure that health and safety and, of course, employment law is exactly the same. But, of course, this gives away the game away that people like John Redwood want to strip away all the workers' protections that we have actually gained from being in the EU. They sought to lay down in law how businesses in different sectors could do their jobs. The Franco-German Axis had undue weight with the Commission, seeking to embed the business models of their main companies into EC law. Except again, that's not what happened, because there are more companies out there. And here's the thing, John Redwood is probably obsessed with the way that British companies do business. And certainly since the 70s, there hasn't really been too much change in the business environment that British businesses actually function and operate. If you've ever worked for a non-British company, you know the difference there is in the office environment. You know how different it is that company operates. And it is a breath of fresh air. It is a completely different environment. And they haven't put this into law, because again, John Redwood might actually want to say, what have actually these Franco-German companies, or at least those governments, put in to law to do that? Again, he doesn't say it. So it was a brilliant power grab. It was anti-enterprise and innovation. So you're saying that since the 1970s, or at least since 1975, there has been absolutely no enterprise going on in all the EC countries and no innovation whatsoever. That is a very bold yet bad claim to make. Anyway, creating trade barriers without, and of course, barriers to innovators and small businesses from within. So here's the first thing, of course, John Redwood, free market fundamentalist. What the EU did, and what it again set out to do, was it set out to protect industries in Europe. Like many industries and many sort of governments, we have seen very, very much jobs and all kinds of stuff move out. So they wanted to create an environment where jobs would stay here in Europe and make a good environment for businesses to want to be in Europe, which it has. It has proven that. You can even see this now, where you have had businesses just move out of Brexit Britain. The first comment was there mentioning about Arm, that decided to completely leave the Brexited UK to go to America on the US stock exchange rather than be listed on the London one. And we've gone over company after company that has moved. And then bad for small businesses. Yeah, you have to follow rules and regulations if you want to do trade within the EU law, but it doesn't matter because small businesses would have to follow regulations regardless. And the idea that businesses wouldn't innovate, no, that's completely false. If you've even worked in any form of UK, any business has been involved in any business environment, you meet amazing small businesses all the time that are innovating constantly all the time. So once again, this idea that this is it, that there's been no enterprise and no innovation since like 1975. Again, this is complete fantasy fiction. So here we go. Back to it. So my job was the negative one of seeking to delay, defer, or amend the worst proposals. I went horse explaining a common market just needed the rule that any product deemed to be of merchandise quality in one member state could be sold to another with clear labels, and consumers could make their own choices. But here's the thing: what do you mean by what is merchandisable quality? Because if you just said that, as you've just said there, well, is this merchandisable quality? If I went out and burned this book and then wanted to sell it on, is that merchandisable quality? And again, the whole thing about labeling. Conservatives have been anti-labeling constantly because they have not wanted um consumers to actually have that choice. We've seen, especially in America, Republicans have been very, very, even though they're so, oh, we're pro consumer choice, but when they have laws have been brought in about labeling, conservatives in America have been very anti-labeling. Very anti-labeling. So again, that could merchandisable quality, you've got to define what that actually means. And that means having rules, laws, and regulations to say and set out what merchandisable quality means. And even then, and you have that sort of standard, and another country might raise their standard, well, you still have to commit to their standards. Even now, there's been a big AI bill passed in the EU, which is looking at probably going to start to really regulate AI in Europe. We're going to have to follow that. GDPR. We can't escape GDPR. Our own bill that we passed in, I think it was 2018 after Brexit, regarding this, basically had GDPR at the core. Because if we say we're not going to follow GDPR rules and regulations, then pretty much any business that holds any European information can suddenly no longer do business in Europe. Because, well, we don't have GDPR regulations. As much as he talks about, oh, business, 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 he doesn't seem to really understand business. And again, just go back to the few lines, the idea that there has been no innovation in this country since like 1975. No, that's completely wrong. So here we are, back to it. So the net result of the excessive single market law making has been to give a huge competitive boost to the USA, where companies have not faced the same controls and legal structures. Well, guess what has happened in the USA when they haven't had those rules and regulations? Businesses have flown the coop. They've constantly got out of America. And not only that, Silicon Valley, which, oh, he's going to go on and talk about Silicon Valley, massive innovation center, primarily set up mostly by subsidies from the US government. John Redwood is anti-subsidy. If we were to try and set up something similar in the UK, John Redwood would be anti-subsidy on that. So we couldn't even set up our own Silicon Valley if we wanted to, because John Redwood would be so anti the very laws to create that. So where are we? So they've not faced again the same controls and legal structures. Well, they have faced very different controls and legal structures. Um, so I would certainly challenge you on that. The digital revolution, which has so changed our lives, has been powered by smartphones, downloads, social media, and the web, all of which have been dominated by the US. Why? Because the US invested, decided it was going to invest in that. So Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Netflix, and Nvidia, uh, all the rest are American titans. In this, such a dominant part of the modern economy, there is no single large global company from a European base. That's absolutely false. I know I have a very big European fan base. I am pretty sure there will be people here who could gladly go, well, there's all this. In fact, let's name one because we talked about one recently, Revolut. Massive, massive in the fintech sector. That's UK, Latvia, I believe. That's got a European base. There are tons. If you Google that, you could find tons of international companies that can challenge some of those companies on an international basis, and they are based in Europe. And of course, this comes back to the whole zombie company argument that, oh, because these companies, or at least some of these companies in Europe, haven't reached the level of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, etc., they're zombie companies and they need to die. But of course, the European Union rules forbid that. We've heard this argument all before. John Redwood, again, this is all fantasy fiction. So, when the EC moved to being the European Union and wants to press on with a single currency, I wrote the book and some of the articles to keep the pound. It was obvious that most British voters understood surrendering our currency would end up with the pretense of effective and would potentially end any pretense of effective self-government. We always had self-government. Even those countries now that are in the euro, they still have self-government. Um, so again, the idea that you know Netherlands doesn't have self-government is completely false. Uh, Again, having a single currency for that covers that amount of area, particularly being the single market, is a massive economic boost because you are combining everyone's economy into one. That makes a very, very strong economy. And that's why the EU has been so good economically at challenging powers like the US. You talk about Silicon Valley. I think I've mentioned this before. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The EU has massively invested into there for tech businesses. If you're going to start a tech startup or anything like that, you go to one of those three countries first because they will get and give you tons of stuff to start tech companies there. Not only that, but the EU has just passed its own version of the Inflation Reduction Act to put and build the factories and industries of the future. What's the UK doing? So the polls always showed very strong majorities against it. It was also clear that many MPs and top civil servants wanted to join the euro or would go along with it. I fought many battles with the Conservative Party to firm up our view that the UK should keep its own currency. We persuaded John Major to secure the all important opt out from joining. But then we had to battle to make sure that no Conservative leader flirted with doing so anyway. And of course, this is we talked about the war with the Maastricht Treaty back in the early 90s. As the war over the Maastricht Treaty developed, it became clear to more people that the EU was not mainly about trade and a market, but it was about building an integrated union with a flag, a parliament, a Supreme Court, and excessive law codes, EU taxes and debts, and common policies across all fields. But you need that anyway in a single market anyway, because who then chooses in a single market without a court, because you can't just go to court in Germany and say my ruling in Germany stands when it might not in France. That's why you have a EU Supreme Court to basically settle matters that govern disputes which might crop up over that. Its Parliament helps decide which of those laws we talk about, which ones we don't want to do. Again, EU taxes and debts. Most of those taxes go into programs that the EU then spends on things like subsidies, on all kinds of stuff to develop countries, to bring their economies up. But there we go. So it became obvious to more conservatives that we needed a new referendum. I would say more conservatives. I would disagree with that. The new question would not be a rerun of 1975, but it would reflect the reality that the evolving union was so much more than a market. And it is more than a market than it is now. It is slowly becoming so. And to be honest, we're not inside it anymore. So we should have, if we were in it, we would have a lot of say how it was on this. And its market was not free. Of course, again, John Redwood's a free market fundamentalist. So as far as you're concerned, you could basically say that any rule and regulation governing someone's working rights is not a free market, which, again, as he said, he wants to sort of get rid of earlier in the article. Belonging it meant to accepting any clumsy laws. Well, of course, we had a say in those laws. He's ignoring that. Paying a heavy tax. Again, we didn't really pay that too much of a heavy tax. In fact, as we said before, for every pound we sent the EU, we got 10 back. That was an amazing investment. And of course, picking up with many restrictions on internal and external trade. And again, those were good for the EU, for the UK, as well as being in the EU. The UK's predictable and tragic ejection from the European exchange mechanism, and of course the nasty recession that followed, led to the exile from the Conservatives from office for over 13 years. In opposition, the party was widely opposed to further integration from the Nice to Amsterdam and the Lisbon treaties. It would also be unacceptable for a new government to get into power, yet be unable to govern in many areas due to the surrender of powers to the EU by the outgoing government with opposition support. Again, we always had our own sovereignty. This idea that we didn't have sovereignty, we always had it. So I and a few other MPs campaigned for a referendum, more like it tried to hold the David Cameron to hostage, but we won't stop reality getting in the way of your fantasy here, John. David Cameron's good decision to promise one in the 2015 manifesto helped us win a majority to govern that year for the first time since 1992. Debatable whether that was the key thing that helped you actually win in 2015, but that can be highly debatable. So I was so pleased to see the British electorate vote to take back control in 2016. Again, take back control of what? Every day since, I rejoiced that we can now shape our own future again when we always could do that. You just seemed to say that we couldn't, but there you go. That's typical Brexiteer logic. But so far, the government has been too cautious, sticking to the failed EU laws and policies. And again, it almost feels like that entire thing has been a preamble to what should be the main article. Again, what failed EU laws and policies? What are those? Too many MPs and civil servants have fought to prevent the UK from doing this, seeking to keep us tied to the EU whatever cost, because there are consequences of doing that. If you diverge from the EU, and guess what? More trade barriers go up. And guess who is our biggest trade partner? It's the EU. That has not changed. That is not going to change. So in a future piece, which again, like I say, he's teasing us now. I will set out how we can use our freedoms more. Again, looking forward to when that drops, because Brexiteers have not actually set that out. It is high time we had some Brexit wins. The USA need not always build the main global business successes. We could narrow the gap in income per head if we tried. Now we are free to do so, but it will take lower and fewer taxes and better laws. Again, this is typical free market fundamentalist stuff. This is nothing new. I highly anticipate chapter 2 of John Redwood's fantasy Brexit promises. But again, why on earth would you write an article say that you've been too cautious, taking that, and then basically spend almost the entire article? Bear in mind, he's spent all this. Where are we? Let's say there. The final 2 paragraphs is where he talks about. He spent the rest of that article spewing the same Eurosceptic nonsense that we have heard for decades and still continue to hear from these free market crackpots all the time. Like, it's not going to change. Even now, they're still trying to keep that the EU Eurosceptic cottage industry that they built and developed going. And here's the thing: we're not in the EU anymore. It's not that effective. All the comments below this are actually pointing out how wrong John Redwood is, how none of these supposed Brexit benefits have really come to pass. And this is from a very pro-conservative website, I'll remind you. So I've said it before, we are far closer to rejoining, or at least doing alignment deals, then rejoining the single market, then eventually the EU, than I think a lot of people actually really realize. I really think we are. And I've said before, I really hope we do rejoin sooner rather than later, because I want to see people like John Redwood, Nigel Farage cry, because oh boy, will they cry. And oh boy, someone like Nigel Farage will be so salty. Oh, it will be a content gold mine. It will be an absolute content gold mine. And then it will be funny to watch them freak out after that result comes in, because oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, that will be fun. That will be so much fun. And to be honest, you guys want to see that. I want to see that. So, let's do it. Let's do it, guys. Let's do it sooner rather than later. So, as always, thank you very much, of course, for watching. And of course, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, as always, thank you very much. And we'll see you all next time.